Okay, let's dive right into what might just be the ultimate unsolved mystery of the human mind. It's a puzzle that has completely fractured the worlds of philosophy and neuroscience, and honestly, it challenges the very fabric of how we understand ourselves. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack what experts call the hard problem of consciousness. We are going to look at the wild theories, the mind-bending thought experiments, and the fierce, ongoing debates that are all trying to answer the single most baffling question about human existence. To get started, I want you to imagine for a second that you just stubbed your toe on a doorframe. Ouch, right? Or think about looking at a ridiculously vibrant, bright red apple. We all know what happens biologically. Your nervous system sends out signals, a bunch of neurons fire in your brain, and you react. But the real mystery, the massive gap in our scientific understanding, is why does it actually feel like something to be you experiencing that? Why is there this internal subjective movie constantly playing inside your head? This whole idea brings us to a massive divide, famously pointed out by cognitive scientist David Chalmers. He basically split the study of the mind into two totally different buckets. On one side, we have the easy problems. Now, easy is definitely tongue-in-cheek here because they include mapping out the incredibly complex mechanics of the nervous system, our behavior, and how our brains process data. But on the other side, we have the hard problem, explaining exactly how and why those physical, biological mechanisms actually give rise to a subjective inner experience. Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we need to talk about a word philosophers absolutely love to use: qualia. Qualia basically refers to the raw, unfiltered, first-person sensation of an experience. It's the specific hurtfulness of pain, the distinct bitter taste of black coffee, or the exact feeling of warmth on your skin when you step into the sun. It is the literal feeling of what it's like to be something. And it's exactly what physical science struggles to measure, map, or explain. What's kind of wild about all this is the backstory. People have been wrestling with this forever. We're talking thinkers from Isaac Newton to René Descartes, and going way back to the ancient Advaita Vedanta philosophers in Hinduism, who pondered this gap between matter and mind for centuries. But it wasn't until 1994, during a talk at the Science of Consciousness conference in Arizona, that David Chalmers finally stepped up and gave this massive historical dilemma the catchy name we still use today. Chalmers really hammered his point home with a question that's as simple as it is completely devastating. He asked, even if we map out every single physical function of the brain, if we know exactly how a visual stimulus triggers a motor response down to the atom, this huge lingering question is still just sitting there completely unanswered. Why on earth does a perfectly functional biological machine need to feel anything at all to get the job done? So how do philosophers even investigate this? Well, they use thought experiments, kind of like mental clothes. The first one, philosophical zombies. Now, forget the Hollywood brain eaters for a second. In philosophy, a zombie is a hypothetical being that is an exact, atom-for-atom, physical replica of you. It talks just like you, it cries when it gets injured, and acts perfectly human. But inside, the lights are entirely off. There is zero conscious experience. It processes everything, but feels absolutely nothing. The whole point Chalmers is making here with the zombie thought experiment is really about the limits of physics. Think about it. If a philosophical zombie is even logically possible, it means the physical laws of our universe just aren't enough to guarantee consciousness. If you can have all the physical parts working perfectly without the subjective feeling, then consciousness has to be something extra. As Chalmers provocatively put it, after hypothetically creating the physical world, God still had more work to do to actually add experience into the mix. Okay, let's check out another famous clue: Mary's room. Picture a brilliant neuroscientist named Mary. She's lived her entire life inside a black and white room. She studies vision relentlessly and learns literally every single physical and biological fact there is to know about how the human brain perceives the color red. But one day, the door finally opens, she steps outside, and she sees a red apple for the very first time. The big question is, does she learn something new? Believers in the hard problems say absolutely yes. She finally learns the qualia, the actual raw experience of red, proving that physical facts just aren't everything. Our third and final clue comes from philosopher Thomas Nagel, who published a famously brilliant paper asking, what is it like to be a bat? Bats navigate using echolocation, right? They perceive the whole world through sonar. Now, we can study their biology all day long, map their tiny brains, and perfectly understand the physical mechanics of echolocation. But no matter how much objective data we gather in a lab, we can never, ever truly know the subjective, internal experience of what it actually feels like to fly around as a bat. Nagel completely hits the nail on the head regarding the absolute friction here between science and consciousness.
Science is fundamentally built on being objective, removing the personal observer to find universal truths we can all agree on. But as Nagel argues, experience is essentially subjective. It's tied directly to a single, localized point of view. So how can a completely objective physical theory of a brain possibly explain a subjective, totally private point of view?
But look, as with any massive debate, not everyone is buying this mystery. Enter the materialists. These folks firmly believe the universe is made entirely of one thing, physical matter. And to them, this whole hard problem is really just a giant misunderstanding of how science works. This materialist pushback basically breaks down into three distinct camps. You've got your type C materialists. They're the optimists. They figure, hey, just as science eventually explained biology and chemistry, future neuroscience will inevitably crack the code of consciousness. Then there's type B, who argue the gap is just a weird quirk of our human psychology, a sort of hardware glitch in how we conceptualize our own minds. And finally, type A takes the most extreme stance, flat out asserting that the hard problem literally doesn't exist at all. Taking that type A view to the absolute extreme, we get to an incredibly fascinating concept called illusionism, championed by thinkers like Daniel Dennett and Keith Frankish. They argue that phenomenal consciousness, that deep inner feeling, is simply a trick of the brain, much like stage magic. Our brains are these vastly complex data processors that evolved to hold simplified, slightly buggy models of themselves. So the brain is constantly telling itself it has this magical inner feeling, but in physical reality, that subjective experience is just a highly convincing user interface. It's an illusion. But what if it's not an illusion? What if that feeling is as real as it gets? On the flip side of the battlefield, we have the believers. These are the thinkers and scientists who insist the hard problem is absolutely genuine. And honestly, if they're right, it proves that physicalism, the idea that only physical matter exists, is completely false. If you accept the hard problem, you literally have to rethink the fundamental nature of reality itself.
This line of thinking leads directly into two massive mind-expanding theories. First up is dualism, which argues that consciousness and physical brain matter are completely separate things. And then there's panpsychism. This is the truly wild, fascinating idea that consciousness isn't just something that pops up in brains, but is actually an intrinsic, fundamental feature built right into the very fabric of all matter. We're talking down to the level of electrons and quarks. And if you want to take it even further, you get into theories like idealism and cosmopsychism. Thinkers like Bernardo Kastrup argue that physical matter doesn't actually exist independently at all. Instead, the entire universe is one giant conscious mind, and what we call physical matter is just what that mental activity looks like from the outside. To explain how you and I have separate individual experiences within this universal mind, they actually use dissociative identity disorder as a natural analogy. Basically, we are all just alters experiencing life within a single cosmic consciousness. Crazy, right? Okay, so we've got brains pulling magic tricks on one end, and the entire universe acting as a giant mind on the other. With all these wild theories flying around, you're probably wondering what the actual consensus is. Let's look at the concrete data to see where the professional experts, the philosophers who dedicate their entire lives to this, currently stand on this grand mystery today. Check out the raw numbers from the 2020 Phil Paper survey. It is pretty striking. A solid 62.4% majority of philosophers actually agree that the hard problem is a genuine unsolved mystery. Only about 29.7% fall into the materialist camp that says the problem does not exist, with the rest basically throwing their hands up and remaining agnostic. This clearly shows us that far from being settled science, the nature of consciousness is easily one of the most hotly debated active frontiers in modern thought. But what if nobody wins this debate? What if the materialists and the dualists are both stuck forever? That brings us to a really humbling and uniquely fascinating concept known as New Mysterianism. This view suggests that the answer to the hard problem definitely exists out there in nature, sure, but we humans simply lack the mental hardware to ever comprehend it. Thinkers like Colin McGann and cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker point out something pretty obvious when you think about it. The human brain is a product of evolution. It was built for surviving on the savannah, hunting and gathering, not for decoding the ultimate nature of reality. Just like a dog can't understand calculus, our biological brains have strict limits. We can't hold 100 numbers in our short-term memory. We definitely can't visualize 7-dimensional space. And, maybe, we are just cognitively closed off from ever intuitively grasping how neural processing suddenly sparks into the magic of subjective experience. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. Take a second right now. Just look around wherever you are. Listen to the sounds in the room. Notice the colors in your vision. Feel the weight of your own body. When you experience all of this, are you just a highly complex biological machine crunching data in the dark?
Or is there a profound, irreducible magic to the simple, undeniable fact that you can feel anything at all? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep wondering and keep exploring.